Hey top drivers, in this video, we're diving deep into the LiveTrack technology, the engine behind dynamic track simulation in Automobilista 2. This feature is responsible for replicating, in real time, the changing grip levels and track conditions as a session unfolds. LiveTrack 3.0, inherited from the Madness engine used in Project Cars 2, is the beating heart of Reza Studio's simulator. But this isn't just eye candy. It's an advanced, highly sophisticated system that brings every session to life by simulating how the track evolves as you drive. This changes everything about how you approach each corner, factoring in the weather, track dirt, and the rubber laid down by the cars. So how does this tech actually work? Essentially, the entire track surface is broken down into a grid of 3D surface cells. Each of these cells monitors physical parameters that update dynamically over time. Specifically, the LiveTrack system continuously tracks and updates key elements: rubber buildup, known in racing lingo as rubbering, which affects grip levels, surface wetness, or how much water is present on the tarmac, road surface temperature, and contamination from dirt, debris, or marbles, those rubber fragments that collect off the racing line. This system can process up to 1 gigabyte of data per minute, constantly updating the physical state of every section of track. That means the circuit evolves. It gets rubbered in, it dries out, it heats up, and it gets dirty. It's a living, breathing track that reacts to every move you make. Arguably, one of the most immersive and technically groundbreaking features ever introduced in a racing simulator. Imagine the circuit covered by a dynamic information map that updates in real time based on car traffic and weather conditions. The tarmac is no longer static. It becomes a living component of the sim. Every brake zone, every throttle input, every time you nail the apex contributes to the ongoing transformation of the track, especially in areas of high tire load like braking zones and traction zones. With version 1.6 of Automobilista 2, Reza took things even further, refining rubber distribution to make it more consistent, especially through corners. This further confirms the cell-based structure of LiveTrack's tech. A clear demonstration of this can be seen in the debug tools used by the developers. One particular debug view shows the grip visualization on the track, comparing two versions, 1.5.6.3 at the top and 1.6 at the bottom. The color maps highlight grip variation along the racing line after a few laps. These color zones represent grip levels and indirectly indicate how much rubber has been laid down in each grid cell. You can clearly see the patchwork pattern of car-passed areas corresponding to the system's simulated cells, and how the optimal racing line is better rubbered than the outer zones. In version 1.5.6.3, rubber buildup was more localized and intense, especially at braking points. But in version 1.6, the rubber distribution looks more even throughout the entire corner, thanks to Reza's updates aimed at extending rubbering more uniformly. This debug visualization confirms that the LiveTrack system uses a high-resolution mapping of the circuit to constantly update and store grip, moisture, and other surface parameters for every single portion of the track. These aren't pre-baked zones or simplistic scripted changes applied to the whole circuit. This is local, reactive simulation, true to life. Every car alters the cells it passes over, and those cells in turn affect the physics of the cars that follow. That's the real power of LiveTrack. It doesn't just simulate rubber, water, and temperature individually, it simulates their interaction. And it does this continuously, evolving the track in real time. Every lap, every change in condition, every decision the driver makes actively shapes the state of the circuit. This forces you to drive reactively, adapting moment by moment, just like in real life. LiveTrack isn't just a system that makes the track feel more realistic. It's the track itself that becomes real. We're not talking about a scripted effect that updates the surface every few minutes. Every car that passes reshapes the circuit in real time, second by second. When the weather changes, the track evolves gradually but continuously. If it starts raining, the asphalt gets wet progressively, cell by cell, following both the intensity of the rain and the track's geometry. Water doesn't spread evenly. It flows to the sides or collects in dips, forming puddles exactly where they'd naturally appear. When the rain stops, the track begins to dry in the areas where cars are running the most. The tires displace the water, heat up the asphalt, and gradually carve out that classic dry line cutting through the middle of the racing groove. Over time, with sun and wind, the rest of the track also dries out. As mentioned earlier, besides simulating grip, rubber, and water, Automobilista 2's LiveTrack system also factors in an element that's often overlooked: the dirt brought onto the racing surface. Every time a car runs off track, onto grass, gravel, or dirt, then rejoins, it drags debris back onto the racing line. This debris gets deposited locally and reduces grip for the cars that follow, just like in real-world racing. And it doesn't stop there. Automobilista 2 also simulates marbles, those little bits of rubber that shear off tires and build up off the racing line over the course of a session. If you run over them, the loss of grip is instant. The car slides, the traction drops, and handling becomes unpredictable. Thankfully, everything is dynamic. As more laps are completed, the ideal line gets cleaner and more stable. And when it rains, the water actually washes away rubber and debris, resetting the circuit to a neutral, or green, state, as we call it in the sim racing world, like a freshly resurfaced track. This level of simulation makes every session feel alive and unique. Every off-track excursion, every train of cars in close formation, every deviation from the ideal line alters the circuit conditions in real time. That's exactly what makes Automobilista 2's physics engine so rich and immersive. But what truly sets Race's simulator apart from other, more mainstream titles is how the wet line behaves. When it rains, the rubbered-in racing line becomes significantly more slippery because the combination of laid rubber and water severely compromises grip. That's why, just like in real motorsport, you're forced to search for alternative lines. But why do we choose different lines in the wet? The practice of taking an alternate route in wet conditions, commonly referred to as the wet line, rather than sticking to the dry line, is well understood in racing. The reasons are rooted in the physics of tire-to-surface interaction. On a wet track, tire grip relies primarily on two phenomena: molecular adhesion and hysteresis friction. Molecular adhesion refers to the physical attraction between the rubber molecules and those of the asphalt. When these surfaces come close together, temporary adhesive bonds form, small molecular bridges that connect the tire to the road surface. The strength of these bonds depends on the material chemistry, the cleanliness of the surface, and molecular compatibility. In the video, you can clearly see how the tire, as it slides to the right, begins to form these bonds with the asphalt molecules, phase 1. At the same time, the rubber's internal viscosity resists deformation, generating a counteracting frictional force. That's your grip. This force opposes the sliding motion, stretching the molecular chains, phase 2, until they break, phase 3, only to reattach slightly ahead and repeat the process. This break and reform cycle happens in fractions of a second and is influenced by speed, vertical load, and therefore downforce, temperature, and the micro-texture of the road surface. Before we jump back into the action, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video. And if you're passionate about sim racing, like we are, join the Università del Sim Racing Facebook group and become part of our growing community. Now, going back to the concept of molecular adhesion, it's this very principle that explains why rubber deposits on the track surface in the first place. As we mentioned earlier, when a car runs a lap, the tire compound's molecules form temporary bonds with the asphalt. These bonds can break in two different ways. If they snap on the asphalt side, the contact breaks cleanly, leaving no residue behind, and the tire continues without depositing material. But if the bond breaks on the rubber side, some of the compound remains anchored to the surface, creating rubber buildup along the racing line. These rubber deposits enhance grip for the cars that follow the same path, because the contact now occurs between layers of rubber rather than bare asphalt. However, if the temperature exceeds the tire's optimal operating window, or the compound degrades excessively, rubber release becomes uncontrolled. The tread begins to shed larger fragments, what we call marbles. These get pushed off the racing line by centrifugal forces in the corners and tend to accumulate along the track edges. The presence of marbles offline drastically reduces grip in those areas, making it risky to stray from the ideal racing line. Hysteresis, on the other hand, is a physical phenomenon that describes the delay between an applied force and a material's response, especially when subjected to continuous cycles of compression and release. For tires, it refers to their ability to deform while rolling over the asphalt, adapting to every surface irregularity, from fine microtextures to curbs and rough patches. This deformation generates a type of friction called hysteresis friction, where part of the mechanical energy absorbed by the rubber is dissipated as heat. Rubber is a viscoelastic material. It has an elastic component, which lets it return to its original shape, and a viscous component, which resists movement and stores energy. When a tire deforms and then relaxes, it doesn't return all the energy it absorbed. Some is lost. And that energy loss, which might sound like a downside, is actually what generates grip. It's thanks to this property that a tire can maintain traction even on slippery or dirty surfaces, providing that critical bit of control a driver needs. Although racetracks may appear smooth as billiard tables to the naked eye or on TV, the reality is very different. If both surfaces, rubber and asphalt, were perfectly smooth, the actual contact area would be equal to the visible one. But on a molecular level, both have imperfections. Contact only occurs where the highest points of these rough surfaces meet. That's why, as the video clearly shows, freshly resurfaced asphalt offers more grip. It has more texture, sharper edges, and protruding peaks. These micro edges allow the rubber to latch on and generate traction. Hysteresis plays a central role here. The compound deforms around these irregularities and, as it tries to snap back to shape, it creates forces that boost grip. The same principle applies on a wet surface, though the dynamics change. The dry racing line is usually the fastest and most direct, but it can become treacherous when it rains. That's because the combination of oils and rubber laid down on the ideal line becomes extremely slick when wet. A frequently used surface gets polished over time, losing its microtexture and offering less grip. When it rains, water forms a thin film that prevents direct contact between rubber and asphalt, effectively blocking molecular adhesion. Thanks to hysteresis, tires can still generate a measurable amount of grip even on wet asphalt. When the rubber deforms around the surface's micro-roughness, the energy stored during compression is released as a rebound force. This process maintains a coefficient of friction even in low traction scenarios, often around 0.4, even though water disrupts the direct contact between rubber and asphalt. If a tire has high hysteresis, meaning it takes longer to return to its original shape after passing over an irregularity, it creates a beneficial effect. Since the rubber can't immediately snap back into place, it exerts different forces on the leading edge, upstream, and trailing edge, downstream, of the obstacle. This asymmetry results in pressure differences that generate frictional forces, allowing the tire to maintain traction even on a wet surface. That's why rain tires are engineered with high hysteresis compounds. They can deform deeply and in a controlled way, making better contact with wet tarmac and providing significantly more grip than standard compounds, which are much less effective in those conditions. That's also why, on a wet track, drivers hunt for less worn areas, where the asphalt is rougher and has minimal rubber buildup. These zones offer better traction, and this is where Automobilista 2 truly stands out, thanks to the meticulous detail in its LiveTrack system. Just like in real life, the grip loss on the dry racing line depends on how much rubber is actually present, not on some predefined value. This means that if you're running a heavy rubber setting where the track is thoroughly rubbered in compared to a green surface with no rubber at all, the dry line will become noticeably more slippery in the wet. The reason is simple. More rubber means more water retention, increasing the greasy film that compromises grip. To fully understand this behavior, it's essential to know that wet conditions in the LiveTrack system are defined by two key variables: water saturation and water pooling. This allows for a wide range of evolving conditions: dry, damp, wet, light rain, medium rain, or heavy rain. But what really matters for grip is how saturated the surface is and how much standing water is present in specific areas. Speaking of tires, Automobilista 2's physics model simulates both cooling from evaporation and heating through the contact patch with the asphalt. For wet weather tires, This balance is crucial. The cooling effect of water is what keeps them in their proper working range. If you use them on a dry track, where there's no evaporative cooling, they overheat quickly, leading to a loss in performance and accelerated wear. The Tyre model accounts not only for the grip provided by the compound itself, but also for the tread pattern. The number of grooves, those channels where rubber doesn't touch the asphalt, directly affects traction. Added to that are the depth of the grooves and how efficiently the tire can evacuate water while rolling. All of these factors shape how the tire behaves under different conditions, from a perfect dry lap to full wet. A slick tire, completely smooth, offers maximum contact with the asphalt, ideal for dry conditions, but becomes nearly useless in the wet. A rain tire, by contrast, sacrifices some contact patch to enhance water evacuation and reduce the risk of aquaplaning. Every tire reacts differently to track conditions, but in general, a slick delivers the highest grip when the surface is dry and the compound is operating within its optimal temperature window. As the track gets wetter and water saturation increases, performance begins to drop off. The tires cool down, grip diminishes, and slicks start to lose their edge. Every compound is engineered to operate within a precise temperature window. And when you step outside that range, like on wet asphalt, the tire's behavior changes dramatically, making the car harder to drive and far less predictable. In intermediate conditions, around 50% saturation, there's often a sweet spot. At this point, the performance gap between slicks and wets narrows, and choosing the right tire becomes absolutely critical. Let's look at a practical example. Suppose the race forecast calls for light rain. In such a scenario, it's unlikely that track saturation will exceed 50%. Meaning you could still get better lap times on slicks compared to full wets. But if the rain intensifies and the track starts to genuinely saturate, the situation changes fast. Slicks will lose grip sharply, and wet tires will become the only viable option. At 100% saturation, essentially a flooded track, slicks become nearly undrivable. They can't reach optimal temperature, can't evacuate water, and grip drops off a cliff. Under these conditions, losing control becomes almost unavoidable. A crucial tip when deciding which tire to run is not to rely solely on the weather conditions. Use forecasts as a general guide, but always pair them with real-time monitoring of lap pace and tire temperatures. In changing conditions, if you notice your tire temps dropping, that's a clear warning. The track is becoming waterlogged and slicks might no longer be the right call. One possible strategy to avoid making an extra pit stop is to intentionally seek out wet sections of the track to cool down the tires. Doing this can help extend their life while maintaining a decent level of grip. And now let's jump on board an LMP2 at a fully soaked Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya, to assess just how credible and consistent the simulation is when it comes to wet weather vehicle behavior. The video makes it abundantly clear just how much more difficult it is to follow the dry racing line in the wet. The rubber laid down on the tarmac makes that groove slippery, forcing the driver to constantly correct, both on corner entry during braking and on corner exit during acceleration. Reading the telemetry, especially the steering trace, you can clearly see how many adjustments are needed just to keep the car under control when sticking to the dry line. The steering rate, the metric that shows how quickly and frequently the driver moves the wheel, also shows sharp, frequent peaks. That's a telltale sign. The wheel is being turned often and aggressively to fight the car's instability. To avoid these issues, driving in the wet means adjusting your racing line so that the outside tires, the ones bearing most of the load, stay off the rubbered-in surface for much of the corner. Only later should you cut back toward the dry line. This technique, as demonstrated in some race footage, provides noticeably more grip compared to the AI-driven cars, which struggle to adapt. It's an area the developers could still improve. Being able to cross over to the dry line at just the right moment can open up opportunities for a decisive overtake. Wet weather driving in Automobilista 2 is both complex and deeply rewarding. You can feel the extra grip in the less used portions of the track through the steering wheel. When you're following the wet line and begin to drift slightly outward, you immediately feel the tires re-engage and regain traction. And this grip recovery isn't binary. It's not an on-off switch. You don't suddenly go from zero grip to full grip just because a tire exits the rubbered line. Instead, it's a gradual transition. You begin to feel more traction as the car enters a section of track with better grip. Maybe it's drier, maybe less rubbered in. The tires start to bite, but it happens smoothly, not abruptly. This is yet another way Automobilista 2's physics shine. The LiveTrack system doesn't assign static grip values to different sections of the track. Instead, it simulates a fluid, seamless evolution that takes into account a multitude of variables: how much water is present, how much rubber has been laid down, whether a car has recently passed over that area, and even whether the surface has been heated or cooled. Here's a small but incredibly telling detail. The amount of water spray thrown up by the tires changes depending on the car's speed and the type of tire being used. This means visibility on track varies significantly depending on the vehicle class. As seen in the video, a modern Formula One car on intermediate tires will kick up a far denser spray column than a GT3 car on the same circuit, under identical water saturation. The result? Following another car closely becomes a serious challenge. It's this obsessive attention to detail that makes Automobilista 2 a truly unique experience in the wet. Here, the track actually changes beneath your wheels. When it rains, it's not enough to just slap on rain tires. You need to figure out where to find grip. If the temperature drops or the race drags on, you'll feel the grip evolving lap after lap. The racing line might dry out, get quicker, or even turn treacherous again. And don't forget, weather conditions are tracked by sector. You might be dealing with a circuit that's half wet and half dry, making tire choice more crucial than ever. And that brings us to the end of the video. If you found this deep dive helpful, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next, and join the Università del Sim racing community to share your passion for virtual motorsport.